Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Research America Alliance discussion. I am Dr. Jasmine George, and I'd like to thank you for joining in Zoom today and for your partnership in the Research America Alliance. I hope everyone is looking forward to this discussion as I am. First, a little administrative housekeeping. If your organization is not a member, I hope you'll shoot an email to Joel, our Director of Membership, whose email is in the chat, to discuss our alliance. So today we are joined by Gelise Thomas, Assistant Director of Strategic DEI and Health Disparities at the Clinical and Translational Science Collaborative of Northern Ohio, or CTSC for short, within Case Western Reserve University. Gelise will speak with us about the work of CTSC and how their research, equity, accessibility, diversity, and inclusion, or READI initiatives are working to shape a more diverse and equitable research landscape. So please type your questions, as always, into the Q&A box or chat, and we will pose as many as we can get to during today's Q&A portion of today's session. Thank you so much for joining us, Gelise. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. George. It is an absolute pleasure to be here with everyone during the lunch hour. I know that's prime time, but we promise to deliver. Are you ready? Research, equity, accessibility, diversity, and inclusion at the CTSC of Northern Ohio was born a little over a year and a half ago, but we have taken off like a rocket, and we're excited to share some of our efforts to date. If you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide, please. So this is what we'll talk about. What is READI? We'll go through some of our programming, workshops, the framework and ideology behind why we are approaching research, equity, accessibility, diversity, and inclusion the way that we are. We'll talk about our Health Equity Challenge series, READI-themed pilot, so that's a funding opportunity, consultations, journal club, and READI News. And on the next slide, we will dive right into programming. So we have divided our programming up into 3 educational tracks: research policy impact, special populations roundtable talks, and equitable community engagement. Why those 3? Well, let's talk about the translational science benefits model, which came out of the University of Washington at St. Louis. There is so much potential, untapped potential, for the benefits of the research that those in our research community are doing, from basic science, preclinical, clinical trials, public health, and having the patient voice at the center of it all. We need to make sure that as we are tackling social determinants and drivers of health, that we are looking toward and looking forward to the impact that our research could have on policy. So in that track, we talk about the CTSC and some of our researchers and what their research has done and how it has impacted policy. We've had Health Policy 101 with the Health Policy Institute of Ohio. And then we just really are trying to make sure that our researchers are thinking about policy first as they're developing and redeveloping their program and research studies. We also have these monthly talks, 60 minutes, and the floor is 30 minutes for the community, organization, or participant. They'll talk about special populations that they serve and ways that we can get involved as a research community, whether it is teaming up on grants or just being better partners, being better people. So within that, we focus on race and ethnicity, sex and gender, rural communities, and people with disabilities. And then we have our equitable community engagement series. So we've talked with community health workers, how to build respectful relationships with community health workers to advance research. We've looked into ways to involve community members as co-authors on research manuscripts and publications, and really just taken the whole idea and opportunity of what does it mean to have equity in community engagement, because we talk about it a lot of grants are requiring it now, but how can you make sure that on the front end you're paying people to their value and really maximizing that lived experience and being respectful of the time and talents that they bring to your research that oftentimes goes unlooked. Next slide, please. So then building off of the programming, we have these opportunities where we get together in a room. We are a collaborative for a reason, to share insights, activities, and resources in a really great space. So right here, you see a photo of Dr. Edward Barksdale. He's talking about his anti-fragility initiative out of university hospitals. And that was our first live workshop, the Research Policy Impact Workshop. And at the end of that, individuals completed a translational science benefits model roadmap to impact. And that's a tool that they can use and leverage throughout the life of their research lab or study. We also had a diversity action plans workshop that kind of built off of our special populations roundtable talks. And with that, we are looking toward the FDA and getting that final guidance, because we want to make sure that we're following the law as we are building those plans, and that we're serving as a resource for our research community, many of who are already creating diversity action plans to try to figure out, what is the FDA expecting? And we know at the end of the month, they'll be holding those public forums where we can help influence that final guidance. And then finally, our equitable community engagement workshop is actually taking place this week on Wednesday, and it is on Zoom, so you're welcome to join. But we'll be looking at putting together a budget that is very much so informed by the real needs of what it takes to do effective community engagement. And we'll also look at navigating the red tape of institutions and ensuring that individuals who want to be a part of your team can be community researchers on that team. Next slide, please. So we had our first health equity research boot camp this year, and this was born from a community partnership. We met an individual who was an ultimate champion of the work. Her name is Mary Louise Tatum, and we co-created this boot camp where we talked about grant development, evaluation, data, dissemination, and implementation. The translational science benefits model, can't talk about that one enough. And the goal of this was to really reach out to and make sure that we had a diverse subsection of individuals in the room. This was hosted at a public library. We love using those spaces. And we had 14 or 15 African-American women in the room who had backgrounds typically as nurses. Some are doctoral students, but they want to do research and they want to do it in the health equity space. So our experts that present on the topics that I just mentioned, they are largely experts within the CTSC. So they might have leadership positions, but they might not. And ultimately, they're just sharing information that they typically do, but just to a new audience. And from this boot camp, many other ideas were born, but the real crux and opportunity of this is the fact that if you are intentional with your strategy and how you're building out programming and thinking about, why are we getting the results that we're getting? We want to see something different. You have to do something different. And we are willing and able to do that through opportunities like this. Next slide, please. So one of the ideas that came from the boot camp was Big Data Tank, Infant and Maternal Morbidity and Mortality Research Edition. So if you are familiar with Shark Tank, this was a friendly Shark Tank style tank pitch event where individuals from the boot camp were able to pitch their ideas that kind of were in this space, the infant, maternal morbidity, mortality, which Cleveland has an unfortunate lead in. And across the nation, the numbers are just crippling, but we want to do something about it, and we're willing to use big data to do that. So we gave all of our participants access to Trinetics, a real world data platform that the CTSC worked over 15 years to make that shared data platform available in our location, and no IRB is required. So we're looking at low-hanging fruit ways to diversify the workforce development pathways and pipeline in research. And this was a great way, at least we saw, to introduce that to the community that participated in the boot camp. And we couldn't have done this, as we all know, as researchers or people a part of research teams, without mentorship. So we had Dr. David Kelber. He's the Chief Medical Informatics Officer at Metro Health and the lead for the CTSC Health Informatics Corps. And he helped us put on a training session, onboarding. He introduced us to medical students who were willing to offer their limited time to help support our pitch participants. And then from then, we invited all of these stakeholders, academia, clinicians, community organizations, government, and philanthropy, because again, kind of going back to that thinking policy impact potential first, if we had all of this buy-in at the beginning, before we even knew what these individuals' ideas were, we knew that that would be the support time that could take it all the way, or support team that could help them take their ideas all the way, rather. And the individuals that attended were just blown away by the pitch ideas. And now we're in the process of continuing to build resources and support. We had one of our professors at Case Western offer up methodological support and data science. And then we've got some OBGYNs that are willing to help refine the research questions. So like, this is the way we see, this is the epitome of team science, if you will, and an illustration of what it looks like to truly be collaborative through the research, equity, accessibility, diversity, and inclusion lens. Next slide, please. So our Health Equity Challenge series, we're in the second year of that. We launched it last year. So you can see the statistics here. We've had 2 book discussions, 2 health equity themed books have been read. We've looked at 2 films. The first film was The Color of Care, produced by the Smithsonian Channel and Oprah Winfrey's Harpo Productions. And we've had actually 9+ film screenings for both The Color of Care and Aftershock. So this year, you know, we're looking at women's health equity. Last year, we had a more general health disparities theme, but we definitely like to have a trajectory because it makes it's easier for people to kind of grasp and understand like where they could potentially fit within the series. And we've had over 1,000 participants to date. It definitely took on a domino effect that we are very fortunate recipients of, because we hosted one screening and then other institutions wanted to do it. And it even blossomed bigger than that. There was like a church in the Midwest that wanted to host a screening too, and we helped hook them up with that. So we absolutely love the potential of something like this, where ultimately the goal is to have people in a shared space, shared learning opportunities from different disciplines, community at large, and just having this understanding and environment where people can be vulnerable and really take home what their role is in a biomedical research enterprise, because we definitely all do have a role in it. And this is a photo of Dr. Deirdre Cooper Owens, author of Medical Bondage, Race, Gender, and the Origins of American Gynecology. We were fortunate to bring her to Cleveland Live. That's at the Cleveland Botanical Garden. We had around 45 different community stakeholders in the room. Some were clinicians, researchers, and people who are just interested in learning about health equity and the history and why we are where we are today and how far we have to go to really advance health equity through all of the work that we do. Next slide, please. So what are people saying? Just a quick note to say how much I enjoyed attending Wednesday's lecture. You paid attention to the smallest details, love the cookies. So I have to talk about the cookies. We had these cookies that were themed off of Dr. Cooper Owens' book. So it was like an Irish flag for Irish immigrant women. We had the African diaspora flag, and it was just the magic, the energy in the room was just phenomenal. And then other people are, you know, talking about just like how great it feels to be included, engaging the community, and feeling inspired to continuously do this work in a climate where sometimes you're not really sure if you should continue doing it. Next slide, please. So what are people doing? We're all about action, right? So people are planning trainings. They're using elements from different stories based on the text that we've selected in their classrooms to teach about health disparities and health equity. As a part of a community outreach team, I am encouraging events in areas that might not otherwise have access to free health screenings. And that was from a community outreach and engagement professional at a healthcare institution. And then they're sharing with their family and friends. And that's where the really big opportunity comes from. We really can't measure the ultimate impact, the ultimate ripple effect of our efforts. But I feel really confident in saying that when someone learns something new, they typically share it with someone else, and then hopefully they share it with someone else. And that continued learning, opportunity, and process can only help advance the work that we're trying to do, and especially health equity and changing policy. Next slide, please. So our READI themed pilot funding opportunity, that was another initiative that we launched last year. The first iteration, the call to action was about increasing clinical trial participation data sharing. So we know that, you know, we mentioned the Trinetics and how that took over 15 years to really manifest to its true potential, and it's still getting there. But it was an attempt to get all of our local institutions to share data in their own way. So we know that the experts are the people who are on the ground doing the work. So we wanted to provide them with some seed funding to kind of explore an idea about what that could look like. In 2023, so we're right in the midst of that right now, the topic is increasing diversity in clinical trials through barrier elimination, because there are many barriers to participation in clinical trials that are disproportionately falling on our underrepresented, under-resourced communities. And we want to encourage teams to use community engagement in that quest. And we've provided anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000 for those projects. And the READI consultations, which I'll talk about in a bit, those are requirements for applicants, and those should be completed before they submit. And the goal of that is to, one, increase the knowledge and awareness about all of the CTSC services, but also through that lens of DEIA, understanding opportunities to increase that and magnify it in your study or project. Next slide here, please. So READI consultations, these are 1-hour conversations that are really used to jumpstart infusion of DEIA in research programs and studies. Emphasis on jumpstart, because a 1-hour conversation, that's just me getting to know you. We're starting to build that relationship. We want you to come back to us time and time again so that we can be a lifelong or career-long resource for you as you are researching. And this is included in the CTSC's new voucher program as well as a voucher eligible service. So within this new voucher program, you can get up to $7,500 to use a number of the CTSC services. And although the initial consultation is free, we're just trying to infuse more money into this work and into this space. So a couple of examples of services that we provided to date, because we really want to use this time as your time. So when you come to us with an idea or a challenge or opportunity, we don't have to talk about A to Z bias and discrimination and ways to kind of curtail those things. We can weave those into the conversation, but like if you have a real need, like editing a job description because you want this position to emphasize DEIA, we can help you with that. We can also help you kind of strategize your research program ideas and kind of your North Star to meet your national funding organizations' priorities as evidenced in their strategic plan. So a lot of alignment, a lot of tips and tricks from law school, taking the bar exam that we use when we're being very linear, like, are you meeting this expectation? If you're not, how can we help you meet that? And this is a photo of the book discussion luncheon with WKYC's Carmen Blackwell. We had a really nice Q&A, and this helped launch a couple of the consultations too. People were curious about the service. Next slide, please. So the READI Journal Club, the purpose of starting that this year was to provide a space for people who are a little more comfortable with talking about DEIA, or I'll just say talking about research and medicine in like a journal club way. So what we do is we focus on topics very much so in alignment with how we approach the special populations roundtable talks. We use all of those cyclically. So we have a journal article about race and ethnicity, and we like the intersectionality piece too. And it's like the more we can talk about in one journal article, the better, because it really shows people the different layers, and the more nuanced that we can be in our studies, the better we can serve our communities. But one thing we didn't expect is to have such a great participation from our clinical and translational science award hubs. It's typically a kind of intimate conversation with them and the work that they're doing and how we kind of have this exchange of ideas. And I mean, we spent an hour just talking about the different definitions of disability. I think that was last month. So it's a great way to, you know, if this is your preferred way of learning, reading, and reflecting, then we would love to have you join us for one of these. Next slide, please. Oh, that's our minority health town hall that we had at this place called Third Space Action Lab. These are all physicians from all of our partners at the time. That was last spring. And one of the things that we try to do is make sure that we're having these events in community spaces, spaces that are accessible. Love the colors in the room too. I think it just kind of adds to the vibrancy of the conversations that were being had. Next slide, please. So READI News was born from the need to talk about the work that we were doing. We know that, you know, with most things, you can't just build it and they will come. Sometimes that works, but that was not the approach here. So as we were trying these new things, we started reporting about them. We talk about the resource highlights that we have on our website. So new laws and policies, terminology, data. We do health disparities researcher features. We think that storytelling, we know that storytelling is key from both a workforce development and community engagement and relationship building perspective, the more people see our researchers as accessible and that their research is meaningful to them as individuals, the better for just the entire biomedical research community. We do event recaps. So on our original programming and partner events, we think it's really important to talk about our partner events because they very much so, especially the healthcare institutions, they're on the front line, if you will, taking care of patients, hearing the feedback. So being able to support things that they're doing and write about it and talk about how it aligns with the research community's work is really important to us. And then we do community organization spotlights. These are organizations that the CTSC has collaborated with or done research with in the past or wants to do research with in the future. So we plant those seeds, and we're doing a lot of short, midterm, and long-term planning and engagement and strategy and execution, most importantly, because we know that relationships aren't built overnight and trust is definitely not built overnight. So that's something that we're consistently doing throughout all of our READI programming and opportunities for engagement. Next slide, please. So if you'd like to contact us, there is our general email. You can also email me at Gelise, Gelise, @case.edu. Please feel free to visit our website, look through our resources, and connect with us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or X, Instagram, and TikTok. We do regularly upload content, especially about our events that we just had, and it would be great to kind of see what you think about some of the things that we're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gelise, for your fantastic presentation. So I wanted to start with a few questions that kind of came to mind while you were speaking. So first is, can you tell us just a little bit more about your own journey and how your perspective, your diverse perspective, has influenced your role as Assistant Director of Strategic DEI and Health Disparities at CTSC?
Absolutely, great question. So I learned about diversity in the 6th grade, and we had these high school trained diversity facilitators that came to our classroom, and it was very much so like, here's the terminology, here's an exercise, how would you handle this problem or challenge, and trying to make us aware even as young as 6th graders. I became a diversity facilitator when I was a junior in high school, and it's just something that has never left me. I'm certain that my lived experiences throughout my entire life have greatly influenced the work and how I approach the work too. But that's like a pivotal moment where I kind of think back and realize, wow, this is definitely not a new concept for me. And I think that's why it comes a little bit more naturally as we're trying to approach different ways to help share the message with those who maybe it's a little more unfamiliar with, or for whatever reason, there's a little bit of timidness to gaining that awareness. Beyond that, I've worked in community and economic development. So with the community outreach and engagement piece, that too comes natural because I've seen it in different industries and spaces like manufacturing and just small businesses, and the concerns that small business owners have very much so mirror clinical research participants and kind of the hesitancy. And it's like, whatever your reason for participating or not, for being in a research role or not, there's things that have influenced that. So I'm very curious about the narrative and the journey and experiences people have had. And I think that curiosity takes me a long way. And then the final piece would just be that I am an attorney. I'm licensed to practice law in California and DC. So that's like the policy bug in me, but then also the way that I very much so approach this work with urgency. I want to see results, and results can take different forms. It's not all about, the quantitative metrics. It's about those quotes that we have on the slides about what people are saying and what they're doing, and making sure that we amplify those things in this work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, something you said kind of brought me back to that. And, when you're talking about introducing into a community, those important, lessons or things that, might be more intuitive to a research institution. So community partnership and involvement is foundational to creating robust DEI efforts. It's clear from the READI programming. So what are some takeaways that the research ecosystem at large can take from these efforts and efforts like this?
Well, I'll share that one key point is that the CTSC launched its inaugural Community Advisory Board this year. So it's a diverse cross-section of individuals whose lived and work experiences will help inform and direct future programming and initiatives. This includes studies, funding opportunities, and more. And when I think about key takeaways for the research community at large, co-design, collaboration, it can take many forms. Ideally, you're involving people at the beginning when you have kind of that blank slate. But if for some reason you can't, whether it's limited resources, limited time, you're planning for that integration and really that intake of that meaningful feedback that the community at large will give you as you are iterating through your programming. A good example is with the READI programming. So all of our programming and events are open to the public. But as we are trying to meet the needs better of the public, we need to make sure that we are integrating and involving the community at the beginning. So a good example would be 2024. Great opportunity to start from a blank-ish slate and see, well, what kind of topics are you interested in as it pertains to research policy and how it impacts you? We can look at it from the very scientific point of view and even from the translational science benefits model and what those benefits are. But as a person in the community, even our city, has priorities for community health. What if your needs as an individual or even as like a subset of the community don't align with those? Should they not be addressed? How do we kind of align resources, limited resources, with the understanding that everyone's lived experiences and challenges are valuable and should be explored? So I think it's all about continuing to create these spaces where we can have researchers speaking directly with the community speaking directly with researchers, so that we can have better outcomes, better health outcomes, and really advance health equity in that way. Because if we're not, it's just a lot of guesswork, and we don't have time for guesswork when lives are at stake.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And in what way would you measure the success of, okay, so I've, been, working with the READI programming. I might have even participated in a journal club. What would you consider as a successful kind of, interaction or a successful way of completing the programming?
So I would say that we are currently measuring success. Formally, we do have evaluations for much, if not all, of our programming, but it's that relationship building piece. It's knowing what other people's priorities and interests are and being able to say, oh, I'm going to reach out to Kyla because I know she was interested in infant and maternal morbidity and mortality. We're having this event. Let's have her be a judge in the room. Oh, there's an opportunity for you to be a moderator in a future programming webinar that we're having that aligns with your interests. And not just looking at the tippy top of leadership. It's really just going across, I don't want to say across the lifespan, but it's kind of across the lifespan of a career, and understanding that there's opportunities to involve med students in our work in a very meaningful way, because these are the future workforce of healthcare, but then also the future leaders. So how can the CTSC be a part of your entire journey? I think that's one of our goals too, is to really be able to be a part of someone's entire story of how they became a translational and clinical scientist.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's very, very important to incorporate collaboration across the research ecosystem, because that's the only way we're going to really understand each other, right? And eventually, hopefully make, some progress, some real medical progress. So have there been any, like, from the development, the kind of start to, and I'm sure you're not finished, but we'll just say finish, from start to finish. Can you tell us if, there have been any major changes in a way that an institution like Case Western approaches clinical research since coming up with such a amazing, like, diversity-driven program?
Yes, so I'm glad that you mentioned that, we're definitely just getting started, but I don't qualify it with just as if it's minimal. I think that I know that we are sending a message to the research community that DEIA is here to stay. We're here to support you through your journey. It does not matter where you're starting. We are trying to, really, integration is key. How can we make DEIA be a part of the foundation, the fabric of all of our existing efforts? Because as I mentioned with the Health Equity Research Bootcamp, it wasn't that the knowledge and the topics and presenters were new. We didn't create that. but it was the opportunity to meet with a group of individuals who typically are not invited to the table to talk about research, to talk about what it would take for them to become principal investigators on their own studies, apply for funding successfully, and all of these things that are just normal topics. But, you kind of ask yourself, like, why has this not been done before in this way? And that's okay, because that's that light bulb moment. That's that opportunity for us all. So I say, look at all of your current existing efforts, whether you're an academic medical institution or not, and try to kind of think outside yourself. And who is missing? Who can you invite to the table? Who can you build a new table with? I think that really is key. And you'll see some really nice, pretty quick results in terms of really measuring the interest, the kind of supply and demand that needs to be created. Kind of pivoting back to the READI themed pilots as an example. So it's not so much that we're looking to have 50 applicants for that. Of course, that would be great. It would be nicer to have 10 successful applicants who have gone through the consultations, who have taken the feedback, implemented it in their final application. And then they said, you know what, the CTSC really wanted me to win. They wanted me to be successful. So now that I'm applying for like NIH funding, or I met this great PI who I'm going to be on the research team for one of their studies, it's just like the opportunities for collaboration and for career advancement, and of course, ultimately advancement of health equity, are really endless when you see that you already have the tools and the resources. You just need to apply them differently.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And okay, so I like to feel a little good, and I love, kind of bringing in some positivity in general. So can we talk a little bit about some success stories, or, so any kind of highlights that you want to bring about the READI program?
Sure. Well, I'll highlight the fact that, just the number of people who had engagement in one way or another through our 2 years of the Health Equity Challenge series. I mean, to be able to talk about our work on a local television channel, their community segment called We the People, that was huge. To be able to chronicle that and really show people and tell the story, or, tell the story about the plane that we were flying as we were building it, or whatever that funny quip is. But really, it's such a pleasure and delight, or we take delight in seeing the limitless possibilities that our work helps catalyze. So, bringing in authors, having book discussions about books that, these are heavy topics. It's not exactly what you would talk about at your dinner table, but the fact that we brought Dr. Cooper Owens here, and we had a local OBGYN say this should be required reading for our OBGYN residents. So of course I take that as, okay, that's an opportunity. Like, how can we make that happen?
Right.
So many seeds are planted, and, once we get wind of it, like, we're watering it, we're giving it sunshine, and we want to see these things grow and blossom. And I think it really goes back to like the part that you said, or when you had mentioned, we're just getting started, but we still have seen so much progress. So
Yeah.
it's really an exciting journey to be a part of.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I do have a few questions, but I'm happy to kick it over to the audience if that makes sense.
Great. Thank you, Dr. George and Gelise, for this fantastic discussion so far. We do have a lot of questions from the audience, starting with the first one. Gelise, do you feel that the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities within NIH has been effective in researching or addressing health disparities and or equity? If not, what can be done to make it more effective?
Well, great question. I think that they have absolutely been effective in researching and addressing health disparities and or equity for a couple of reasons. They were created to do just that. So being able to have those resources, both from like an intellectual perspective, that cadre, that brain trust of people who are interested in exploring those problems. I think one of the things or pieces of feedback that people give when it pertains to health disparities generally is that they don't want to see more research about health disparities. Like, stop defining the problem. We know what the problem is. So what do we do about it? And I'm not saying that is something that has been said about the NIMHD, but it's just generally speaking, especially locally, people want to see action. So I would say, if anything, and this is a universal statement globally, that the more that we can do for the research that has already told us what the problem is, to solve those, to implement those interventions, the better. And I think that communities will have much more respect and urgency and kind of just excitement about research and the biomedical research enterprise as a whole, if they can see the connections, can understand, and are a part of those stories. I think that that's really important.
Great, thank you. Next question. To improve health equity, has CTSC worked with any pharmacy schools in Ohio? This person is from the AACP, American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy, and they are doing some work on a model involving community pharmacy, academia, and CBOs in addressing barriers to diversity in clinical trials and other health equity research. She would also love to connect with CTSC.
Well, first, we would love to connect with you. So please, please, please reach out. And when you said pharmacy, I immediately thought back to when my high school chemistry class, we took a field trip to the University of Toledo, which is one of the CTSC's newest partners, along with the Northeast Ohio Medical University, NeoMed. And we toured the pharmacy school. So we have not done anything within the READI program. I can't speak for the CTSC at large, but we would absolutely love to explore potential collaborations.
Great, thank you. All right, next question. Can you please speak to how CTSC is engaging community practitioners in the clinical trial ecosystem and ensuring that they are offering trials to diverse groups of patients?
So the CTSC itself is a hub for researchers to pretty much provide those resources, rather, for research and to promote collaboration. So we are not doing that ourselves, but through our partners, who are hospital institutions in many regards, they are doing a lot of great work. They have community advisory boards who are helping to inform their studies. They are doing community outreach at local colleges and high schools, and maybe even middle schools in some cases, to talk about the careers. And when you talk about the careers, those conversations are being had when the kids go home and talk with their parents about and ask questions. So we're piquing curiosity, throughout many different demographics and communities. And in terms of the clinical trial diversity and increasing that, it's really a lot of this community outreach and engagement, especially those that are done in like primary care practices. And with some of our larger events, like one of our partners, Metro Health, they just had their first multicultural women's health fair. And I believe like thousands attended that. They got screenings. And from those screenings, what do you get? Maybe a diagnosis that could qualify you to participate in a clinical trial. So those conversations are definitely bubbling and ripe for opportunity to increase diversity in clinical trials.
Great, thanks so much. Next question, have you done any research regarding rare disease and health equity?
So I have not personally done any research regarding rare disease and health equity, but that is one of our funding institutions' priorities. So the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, that is one of their absolute priorities. They have a lot of webinars about that and funding opportunities. So I would say arguably through NCATS, that the CTSA hubs, that is something that individuals are exploring.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So now I'm going to turn to a few questions that were pre-submitted from our registrants. What functional impacts will be increasing diversity have on trial accrual logistics, time and standards / requirements? Increased diversity will also have implications for outcomes and endpoints, including reduced sensitivity and power.
Can you repeat the first part of that question, please?
Oh, sure. What functional impacts will be increasing diversity? What functional impacts will increasing diversity have on trial accrual logistics, time and standards requirements?
Well, I think that when you've done your effective community outreach and engagement and you already have those relationships, it should definitely shorten the time for recruitment. So you know exactly who to go to. If it's a study that's focusing on Latina women over 65 who have a disability, and you have a relationship with an organization that services that population in particular, you just make that call to the executive director, and then there's an opportunity for the principal investigator to come and talk about their research and work, and then they can end it with this opportunity to participate in a clinical trial, as opposed to creating this study and needing this special population, and you're like, well, I don't really know where to start, but you already have your green light, and now you have 6 months to do all of the things that you could have kind of taken your time over the past couple of years by building those relationships. So I would say, from my perspective and based on my knowledge, that it should definitely shorten that time for recruitment and result in more successful trials that have that diversity that we seek.
Great, thanks so much. And I think we have time for just one last question. Do you have proposals for incentivizing creation of more equitable and inclusive integrated data sets, electronic health records and genomic data sets for clinical research with reference to underrepresented groups in the US?
So we do have proposals that were submitted through our READI themed pilot, but in terms of coming out of like the READI department within the CTSC, that is absolutely an area that's ripe for opportunity. Just like we're exploring Trinetics and how we can leverage that with the real world data, we're also getting Cosmos from Microsoft shortly. So we're very much so on the front end of kind of learning about all these tools and how we can leverage them to advance health equity, but we're up for the challenge and excited to learn.
Great, thank you so much. And I'll invite Dr. George back on.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Gelise, for just all of your hard work at Case Western. So it looks like that's all the time that we have for today. So thank you so much to the audience for your thoughts and participation in today's Alliance discussion. And I will turn it back to my colleague, Jacqueline, to talk about the next Alliance discussion coming up.
Great, thanks again, Dr. George and Gelise. Fantastic discussion. And before you go, I hope you can join for our next Alliance member only discussion on November 14th at noon Eastern. This timely Alliance discussion is ahead of the November 17th continuing resolution expiration. If your organization is a Research America member, we invite you to an off-the-record conversation with Rob Smith, Managing Director at Capital Alpha. He has over 2 decades of experience in Washington's healthcare landscape, so he will delve into the complexities of Congress's current happenings. He'll also help us walk through the outlook for FY24 appropriations following the CR expiration, what recent congressional leadership changes mean as we enter an election year, and more. So if you're an Alliance member, look out in your inboxes this week for the registration link. So thank you all again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great afternoon.